Hello, boys and girls. I am Story Granddad. My name is Harry Johnston, and I have a story to tell you. Now, this is a story that you've heard before, but the true story is a lot different than the one you've heard. So, let me explain a few things. There was this guy named Professor Moore, and he wrote a long poem called The Night Before Christmas. He wrote that in 1823. Now that's a long time ago for most of you. But for Santa, that's not very long at all. Santa has been coming for almost 2,000 years now. Now, you see, when Mr. Moore wrote that little poem of his, he did it right after he had a talk with me. Now, you look at me and you say, oh, you're not that old, and people don't live to be that old. Well, ordinarily, that's true. But let me explain. Back 300 years ago, my wife and my 12 children and I made a decision that we were going to move. We had found a special radish that only grows in cold weather. Now you're saying, why would you ever care about radishes? Well, this was a special radish. It was a radish that was the size of a big turnip. And it is a purple radish, and there's lots of purple radishes around. But this purple radish tastes like a perfectly ripe plum. It's wonderful. It has a little hot part to it that the radish always does, but it's plum with a little bit of hot, and it's wonderful. And you say, well, why have I never tasted it before? It's because this radish is something that Santa's elves really, really like. And the other thing about this radish is it only grows in cold places, very cold places. So we heard that land up near the North Pole was cheap, and we moved without looking first, just because we knew it was a place that would grow our radishes very nicely. We moved 100 miles south of the North Pole. And we are the house that is the farthest north of any other place in the world except for the North Pole. So, you see, Santa has lived for a long, long time. As I said, when you live that close to him, you also live for a long, long time. So I was a young man, only about 38 years old. Now you might not think that's young, but to me that's young. I was 38 years old when we moved up there. How old do I look now? 39? Thank you. Maybe not. Maybe a little older than that. But at any rate, I have lived a long time. And even though Santa is 100 miles away, he's my nearest neighbor. And when you move in somewhere, you like to get to know your neighbor. So I went trudging northward and eventually found the place. It's hard to find. You have to know where you're going. There's just snow everywhere. Everything looks the same. There's no landmarks, you know. But I got up there, and sure enough, at the North Pole, there is a pole. And some people think it's got stripes on it like a candy cane. That's not true. It is a white pole. So it's very hard to see. But I was lucky, and I found it, and there was nothing else, and so I knocked on it. And just like you see in some movies, the pole just sunk down into the earth, and a door opened up that was flat on the ground. So I knocked on the door, and it opened up, and I went down a ladder, and there I was. And there Santa was. Well, he invited me over to dinner, and I said, well, I don't want to come to your house alone for dinner. I want to bring my wife and kids. And he said, all right, well, come next Tuesday. This was in July, of course. So my family and I, we went 100 miles from our house to Santa's house. And I had a nice sleigh to take us up there, and everything went fine. And dinner was great. But here's the interesting thing, and I don't want you to be disappointed about this. This is kind of sad for some of you to know. When I got to the North Pole again, and knocked on the door. This time Mrs. Claus came to the door, and she's a very lovely lady. You would be delighted with her. And she said, "Santa can't come right now. He's still working out." And I thought, Santa's working out? Because even in those days, we knew that Santa was, we thought he was fat, but he's not. As it turns out, Santa works out every single day. And let me explain why. On Christmas, every single Christmas Eve, Santa has to visit 600 million homes. Now, it's true that his bag is magical, and his bag has all the presents that everybody is going to get in them. But still, even with that magic, it still weighs about 158 pounds. I know, because I tried to lift it and I just barely could lift it. And Santa just throws it around. It's because he works out all year round. All year round he's working out, so that on Christmas, when he's going to those 600 million homes, he can lift that bag again and again and get up and out of his sleigh. When you get up and down 600 million times in one night, you're tired. Well, Santa has to stay in shape. So, whenever you see Santa Claus and it looks like he has a fat belly, I want you to understand something. He's wearing a fake belly underneath that red suit of his. Well, anyway, something else interesting. Santa is a very, very truthful man. And he does not want people to get the wrong impression. So, he said, "Well, it's nice to have you up here, and I'll tell you what, Mr. Johnson." I said, "Oh, please call me Harry." He said, "Okay, Harry." He said, "I tell you what, it's nice to have you living there, because the reindeer are very tired after running around the world." And I'll explain something more about that in a few minutes. They're very, very tired, and they are looking forward to some rest, but they can't rest until the job is done. Your house being there will give them a rest before the last sprint to back home, and it'll be good for them. So he said, "I'm very happy you've moved in." Well, that made me feel good. And not only that, we'd already planted our radishes, and they were just growing like crazy. And so for a treat, I had about 80 dozen radishes that we'd grown, and I gave them to the elves, and they were so happy. They promised me some really nice gifts for Christmas. And so, oh man, it was in July, but we started looking forward to Christmas right then. Well, so after this Christmas that we had, our first Christmas living up there in the North Pole, it was in 1823. Well, it was actually 1822. And I had a Professor Moore that was my friend in New York City. And I was writing him letters. Now, how does mail get from 100 miles south of the North Pole down to New York City? Well, this is kind of sad to say, but the only way that mail could get down in those days, nowadays they got jets and stuff like that, but we didn't have those then. Santa had to send one of his reindeer to deliver mail. And that reindeer would deliver mail from the North Pole and from the rest of the world to the North Pole. And it isn't a fun job. It's a lot more fun to pull the sleigh. So they would take turns. And the year that I was going to, well, that Santa was going to come and visit me for the first time, whose turn do you think it was? Of course, you know, it had to be Rudolph. Because when Santa says in the poem, "On Dasher, on Dancer, on Prancer, on Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Donner, and Blitzen," notice he doesn't say Rudolph. It's because Rudolph is so tired from delivering mail all year long. Fortunately, most places take Christmas Eve and Christmas Day off, so he had a break. Well, anyway, so I was minding my business on Christmas Eve. Now, let me start telling you some of the things wrong with the story that we have. First of all, it says, 'Twas the night before Christmas. That part is true. And all through the house, not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. That is ridiculous. In a family with 12 children, all of them are not asleep at all on Christmas night except while Santa's there, and I'll explain why in just a minute. But they are so excited about Christmas, plus they heard the elves promise us some really nice presents, and so they were giggling, and I would say, "Kids, go to sleep." And they'd all say, "Okay." And they'd lie in their bed for about 10 seconds and they'd start giggling and talking together again. "What do you think we're going to get home, man? We're going to get that dolly that opens and shuts its eyes and all that kind of stuff." And I'll tell you why, because there weren't dollies for most people that open and shut their eyes in those days, but the Santa's elves had worked out their research and development for hundreds of years into the future. And one of my daughters did get one of those dollies for Christmas, believe it or not. Amazing. Well, anyhow, so there were many creatures stirring, but there were no mice stirring, because with all the thumping around and everything that was going on upstairs, those mice were terrified and were back in their holes, and they weren't going to move for Christmas. Well, anyway, so I kept yelling out, "You kids be quiet up there," but every time I'd yell that, more kids would wake up, and I'd hear some, I'd start hearing less kids. And then all of a sudden, there was a bright moon that night, I remember. And all of a sudden, a shadow crossed across my face, and I looked, and sure enough, the moon was low on the horizon. And sure enough, along the path toward our house, I could see a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer. That part's true too. And a little old driver so lively and quick, I knew in a moment it must be St. Nick. No, that's not true. I knew it was St. Nick because I already had met him and I recognized him. He's very distinctive, as you know. Well, anyway, now here's something interesting. People think from listening the night before Christmas that the reindeer fly everywhere. The reindeer don't fly everywhere. The reindeer glide along the ground. Now see, in the poem it says, "As dry leaves before the wild hurricane fly, when they meet with an obstacle mount to the sky." What that means is that the dry leaves are flying along, and when they meet to an obstacle or like a house or something, they fly up. That's just what Santa's sleigh does. And that's why he says, "To the top of the porch." Well, porches aren't very high. Then to the top of the wall. Now dash away, dash away, dash away all. He wouldn't have to say that if they were already in the air, but they were on the ground. But they did rise up when they came to our house. And see, I don't know where this impression came along from about reindeer flying all over the place. Reindeer actually have tremendous leaping ability. And actually that's where they got their name, is reindeer. People spell it R-E-I-N, but it's actually R-A-I-N. It's like rain can fall down, reindeer can go up. And they just came to my house and they went up and they landed on the roof, and I could hear their paws as each one of them went click, 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 click. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, well, this is kind of embarrassing. You see, reindeer, they do have paws. You're saying, well, reindeer are supposed to have hooves. No, reindeer have paws, and I can prove it. You see, think of the song, "Up on the housetop, reindeer's paws." Why do you think it says paws? Because in order for them to hold onto the roofs best, they have to have paws, and hooves slip all over the place. But Santa and his elves had designed a special kind of shoe to put on the reindeer, because when you land on 600 million roofs in one night, your feet get sore. And so these shoes were hard, and yet they were designed to also stick to roofs, even tile roofs, even snow-covered tile roofs. And of course, Santa and his elves don't do anything but very high-quality stuff. So I could hear the clicking, but all of a sudden, I heard this crunch! And then I heard a voice say, "What was that?" it wasn't any of my children, because my children had gone to sleep about 5 seconds before Santa got to our house. Now you say, how did that happen? Well, it happened because Santa has a magic powder that he uses. Now he has it in little tiny packets, like little BBs. And when he gets near to a house, he throws those BBs, and he is such a good aim that any hole that there is in the house, whether it be a crack in the siding, whether it be down the chimney, whether it be down the plumbing vents, those little BBs get in those cracks and into the house, and they spread some kind of mist that makes everybody go to sleep. It works better on kids for some reason. It put my wife to sleep, but it didn't put me to sleep. Well, anyway, so I heard this crunch sound, and immediately I knew what it was, and I must admit, my heart sank. Now this is embarrassing. In the North Pole, or near to the North Pole, 100 miles south of the North Pole, there is lots of snow. I mean, lots and lots and lots of snow. A house could get 12 feet of snow. And so the roofs need to be strong, and whoever built my roof had one little spot that he didn't have strengthened up. And the snow had gotten on there, and it had punched his way right through the roof. And my wife was saying, Harry, you got to get that fixed, because if you don't, we're all going to get flooded with snow. And she was right, of course. And I looked in the forecast, and the forecast said for the next 2 weeks, see, even back in 1822, people were trying to predict the weather. Now, that's ridiculous. You know that they didn't have any way to predict the weather unless they were just lucky. Well, there was a guy named Lucky Weatherman, and he would predict the weather pretty well. And so I trusted him. He said, for 2 weeks, we're not going to get any more than 3 feet of snow up 100 miles south of the North Pole. And I said, well, some good stout shingles will take care of that. And I didn't have the time. I had some old boards out in the barn I could have put on the roof, but I didn't have the time. I was trying to get my house ready for Christmas, and it is really hard to find a tree 100 miles south of the North Pole. Eventually, the only tree I could find was only that high, and that was the tallest tree around. And we'd gone a long way for it, so I didn't have time to fix the roof. I just put the shingles over it and nailed them in place well enough to last. And what do you think? But one of the reindeer, and it was Vixen. Vixen's a klutz anyway. He stepped right on that place, and his foot went right down into the roof. And the other reindeer were pulling on him because they wanted to get up a little bit higher on the roof. And I heard a kunk. That's the sound a reindeer's leg makes when it breaks. Kunk. Oh, no. And I heard Santa say, oh, Vixen. And I heard another voice say, who's the stupid idiot that didn't put a board over this hole? Well, I knew Santa's voice, and that wasn't Santa's voice. Well, I found out later. I didn't know at the time what happened, but all of a sudden I heard a noise at our fireplace. And of course I'd put the fire out, although Santa, has a fireproof suit and everything. It's still not comfortable for him to go down in the middle of all that smoke. Especially, if a feller's going to live for more than 2,000 years, that's a lot of smoke to breathe. And that is another thing that I need to tell you now. Santa does not smoke a pipe. The doctor told him 200 years back in the 1600s, he told him, Santa, you can't smoke a pipe anymore. You're breathing all that chimney smoke, and if you smoke a pipe, it's going to hurt your lungs, and you're only going to live 1,800 years. And so Santa decided he was going to do just what the doctor said and quit smoking the pipe. But it was already part of his image that he had a pipe, so he got a pipe, and those bubble pipes. You remember those from you put a little bit of soap suds in it, you blow bubbles, Well, the elves made one that had bubbles in it, so it was kind of fun to blow on it. But as soon as those bubbles popped, and they popped before they came out of the pipe so you couldn't see it, they turned to something that looked like smoke. But all it was water mist. It looked like smoke though. Anyway, so Santa, he came down the chimney upside down. Now, of course, Santa has some kind of magical way of coming down the chimney so he doesn't go all that fast. Otherwise, he'd break his leg 600 million times. No. But he still bumped his head on the grate, and it made him woozy. Now, later on, I found out what had happened was that he was tending to Vixen, and as he was backing toward the chimney, about ready to turn around, he misjudged where it was, and instead of turning around right, he tripped over it and just fell right in head first. And he was woozy, and he couldn't read his list very well of who was supposed to get what, and so he called out, "Bound, bound." Well, I didn't know what bound was or who bound was. But remember how it says down the chimney he came with a bound? Well, that was the name of the elf that was with him. It was the name of the elf that had the unpleasant voice that was complaining about the hole in my roof. And he complains about everything, as it turns out. I got to meet him and talk to him later on, and he is not a nice kid. In fact, I would say he's a jerk. And I told Mr. Moore, Professor Moore, the guy that wrote the poem, that this guy is a jerk, and he put him right in the poem. He said, after Santa filled all the stockings, he turned with a jerk. That jerk was that kid that that named Bound that came with him. Well, anyway, let me tell you a few things. So, just like Mr. Moore says, he was dressed all in fur from his head to his foot. Of course he's dressed in fur. He's going into cold country. Now, of course, Santa's suit has extra special insulation in it, so that even though it is very, very warm, when he's in hot weather, it has a cooling feature to it. And he's had that for 1,700 years on his suit. That's how smart those elves of Santa's are. I'll tell you what. So, he was dressed all in fur from his head to his foot, and of course his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. If you've gone down, well, there's not 600 million chimneys in the world, and there weren't in those days either, but he'd gone down millions and millions of chimneys, and of course he's all tarnished with ashes and soot. Even though the guarantee on his suit when he bought it says, guaranteed not to be tarnished with ashes and soot, but they weren't expecting the type of use that Santa was going to put into it. Millions of chimneys, you know. So anyway, let's see. Dressed all in fur from his head to his foot, told all around tarnished with ashes and soot. He was chubby old and plump. Oh, no, listen, his eyes, how they twinkled. Oh, Santa's eyes twinkle like crazy. And he does have the cutest dimples. That's what Mrs. Claus says. I don't think they're that cute, you know. But anyway, his dimples, how merry. His cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. Oh, that is really true. But it's because of his image. I hate to tell you this is going to hurt your feelings again. Mrs. Claus puts lipstick on Santa's nose before he goes on his trip because that's part of his image. People are expecting him to have a red nose. Santa's nose is not red. He's been in that cold for a long, long time, and he's used to it. His nose is the same color as the rest of his body. But that stuff worked its way into the story. It fit the image, and so Mr. Morse threw it in there, you know. Let's see. Okay, so he has a round face. You know how he has a round face? Before he goes out on Christmas Eve, because like I said, Santa's not fat, Mrs. Claus puts rolled up cloth in his cheeks to make his cheeks look more full, so it looks like he's chubby and plump. And you notice that his suit, even though Santa looks like he's fat, his suit is loose on him. It's loose so you can't see the muscles on his arms and on his legs. If you were to see Santa, you would be impressed with how buff he is. Oh, man. And I went in one day when he was working out, and if you remember a guy named Arnold Schwarzenegger, he's got nothing on Santa. And here's something else, and this is really going to hurt your feelings. That big old beard that Santa grows, he grows that in 3 days. The rest of the year he's clean shaven. The elves have given him something, magical beard grow or something that makes that beard come right out. You can't work out as hard as he does and have an itchy beard that's getting in the way. And one time he forgot to shave after Christmas, and he was working out, and his beard got caught on one of the cogs of his rowing machine, and it pulled it out, and boy did that hurt. And so he made sure to shave every single time immediately when as soon as he woke up from his sleep after his 2-day sleep after Christmas. Well, anyway, a wink of his eye and a twist of his head soon gave me to know I had nothing to dread. I don't know why Mr. Moore wrote that. As soon as you see Santa, the real Santa, you're not afraid. You just feel his love for you, even for me as an adult. But on the time when he came with me, the jerk filled all the stockings. And the jerk even tried to hold back some of the nice presents the other elves said they were going to give us, because the jerk doesn't like purple radishes. And he wanted to keep those things for himself, but Santa said, Bound, do it just like the list says. And even though he's a jerk, he knows he better obey Santa or he's out of a job. And there aren't many jobs for elves like him. He's lucky he has that job. It's because Santa's such a nice guy that the jerk has that kind of job. Well, anyway, he filled all the stockings, but Santa had a little talk with me, and he said, Harry, you had better be careful. This is going to disappoint you a lot, Harry, but because you were not a good boy and fixed the roof like you were supposed to, I can't bring you the special present the elves were going to bring you. Oh, no, Santa, I promise I'm going to get it done tomorrow. No, you're not going to do it on Christmas Day, and you're not going to do it on the next day either, and it's too late. And here's something else I just forgot to tell you. My wife is the best cookie maker in the world. And you've heard of, Mrs. Fields' cookies and Grandma's cookies and all that. They learned from my wife, and they didn't learn half of what she knows. And Santa was looking forward so much to the milk and cookies because he gets so hungry. You say, well, people leave out milk and cookies for him. Well, some people do, about 1 out of 100. But that means 100 times he goes, 99 times he goes to houses, there's no milk and cookies for him. And you know what happened on this Christmas Eve when he's got this little guy that got out of the sleigh? The jerk went and ate every single one of the 12 cookies my wife had ready for Santa. And these are not just little, Oreo size. These are monster size cookies. And the jerk went and ate them all. The only good news was he didn't drink the milk. And he didn't even know what the term was, but I found out later he has lactose intolerance, where when he drinks milk, he gets all upset stomach. And he knew that, so he didn't drink the milk. So Santa drank his milk, and it was good, rich, creamy milk, and it was nice and cold, and it was very refreshing. He was happy because he didn't get any cookies. And he had been looking forward to those cookies for the last 1,000 miles of his journey, and the jerk ate them all. I hope the jerk gets demoted. Well, I think he did. But I don't know. I'll ask Santa about it next time. I forgot to ask about that. Well, anyway, so it says he filled all the stockings, then turned with the jerk, and laying his finger aside of his nose and giving a nod, up the chimney he rose. But here's the thing, and this was kind of funny. See, the jerk, he used the same magic that Santa used to go down the chimney so it didn't hurt him. But he didn't have the magic to go up the chimney. You have to touch the side of your nose and give exactly the right kind of nod in the perfect way in order for that to work. And the jerk didn't know that magic. So Santa shoved him into the chimney, And then he went up the chimney and hit that jerk right in his hind end. Boom! Ow! The jerk said. And then he went up a little bit and Santa came up some more. Boom! Hit him again. Ow! The jerk said again. And he said ow about 5 times getting out of our chimney because we have a tall chimney. Well, anyway, he sprang to his sleigh and to his team gave a whistle. And the sad thing is, and away they all flew like the down of a thistle. That's not true. Remember, Vixen's been hurt. And so they limped down off that roof, but Santa did whistle to his team. He whistled and shouted when he was coming in too. Remember, he whistled and shouted and called them by name? Well, the trouble is that he didn't want to make it sound like something bad happened. He wanted to make it sound like a normal Christmas Eve. So, he said they flew away like the down of a thistle. They didn't fly away like the down of a thistle. They flew away like a shot put. Just boom, boom. And it took them a long time to get home. And they still went pretty fast because eventually Vixen just lifted up her leg and did I say her? Vixen's a boy. But sometimes Vixen is also a female of something or other. A female fox is a vixen. Anyway, Vixen limped home, and he was okay after a few days. The elves took care of him and fixed that broken leg, and it got better really fast. Well, so that is how the real night before Christmas went. And I am going to tell bedtime stories frequently. I've had a lot of experiences where when someone has lived as long as I have, they have seen a lot of things. And I have lots of stories to tell you that you think you know, but you don't really know. But I'll set it straight for you. And it'll make you happy to know the truth. And for now, good night.